Now, after leaving, Yoriichi simply yearned to run while admiring the beauty of the sky, and in doing so, ran for an entire day and night without a single moment's rest. But when he reached the mountains, he met a girl who stood unmoving with a bucket in her hands. Apparently, her family had all died due to a plague, leaving her all alone and understandably lonely. So to offset that feeling, she came to catch tadpoles to bring back home with her. But she remained standing there, unable to move. And as the sun began to set, she released the tadpoles from her bucket, feeling remorseful for separating them from their families. Yoriichi, seeing the sadness of this girl whose eyes resembled obsidian, decided to live with her. Her name was Uta, and she could talk from sun up to sundown. And it was actually through his conversations with her that Yoriichi realized that other people didn't see the transparent world as he did, allowing him to then understand why he had for so long felt distance from others, going as far as to liken himself to a kite with a broken string. But Uta apparently held on to him firmly. 10 years later, and the two had married and were expecting a child to be born in the coming days. Because of this, Yoriichi set out to find a midwife, planning to do so before the sun set. But along the way, he encountered an elderly gentleman who, despite his heart complications, was making his way to visit his son, who had been fatally wounded in battle. Yoriichi, being the gentle soul that he was, assisted the man and brought him to his son, deciding to instead summon a midwife the following day, and decided to go back home. But night had arrived, and when he returned home, he was met with the chilling sight of his wife and unborn child who had been slaughtered. Having lost these lives he cherished more than his own, Yoriichi went on to cradle their bodies for 10 consecutive days. From there, a demon slayer in pursuit of a demon would come across this scene and convince Yoriichi to mourn them properly through prayer. And this demon slayer was actually the ancestor of the flame Hashira, Rengoku. You see, Yoriichi's dream at the time was to live a simple life with his family in a house so small that they'd sleep side by side, keeping so close that he'd always be able to see their beautiful faces. But unfortunately, in this beautiful world exist demons. And so it was from then on that Yoriichi would join the ranks of the demon slayers, and in doing so would change things forever by teaching them the breathing techniques. Yoriichi's sun breathing was that of legend, but wasn't necessarily suited for the bodies and skills of the various Hashira, who couldn't come close to matching him. And so it was for this reason that he tailored their tutelage to the original sword forms of flame, wind, water, thunder, and stone, which is where all the derivative breathing techniques we know of today come from. And it was also during his time as a demon slayer that Yoriichi would reunite with his brother by saving him from a demon who had slaughtered his subordinates. Yoriichi, having arrived late, apologized to his brother for not arriving sooner. After that, Michikatsu too would join the demon slayer. With their bolstered strength and forces, the mark would begin to spread, making them even more powerful. The golden age of demon slayers was upon them. But this prosperity wouldn't last very long, as marked ones began dying one after the other, as the mark apparently gave power in exchange for a person's lifespan. But even still, it wouldn't be long before Yoriichi came face to face with destiny, as he'd come across Kibitsuji Muzan himself. And it was in that very moment that Yoriichi believed himself to have been born to defeat him. Muzan's malice was sickening. Yoriichi described his presence to be like magma erupting from a volcano, as if the consumption of all was his primary directive. The two faced one another in a field of bamboo, and the only thing Muzan would say before striking was that he no longer had an interest in swordsmen who used breathing techniques, making it pretty clear that the recent phenomenon had gained his attention at some point, but no longer, clearly unaware that he was in the presence of its creator. But with blistering speeds, Muzan displayed absurdly swift and long-reaching strikes that cut through bamboo as Yoriichi dodged. Immediately realizing that even a single scratch could kill him, Yoriichi, for the first time in battle, felt a chill run down his spine. The innards of this monstrosity were wretched. He had 7 hearts and 5 brains, so simply decapitating him wouldn't be enough. But with a dazzling series of motions, Yoriichi had completed the 13 sword forms of the sun and struck the human-shaped demonic scourge. And with that, Muzan was instantly split in half and had lost both arms. But with the stubs that remained, he desperately kept his severed head on his shoulders as he retched in pain and confusion as to why his limbs weren't regenerating, and his head wouldn't reconnect. And so, with Muzan in such a pitiful state, Yoriichi felt the need to ask him what the value of a life was to him, a question that Muzan would not answer. Instead, with anger, his face became beet red. With that, Yoriichi looked to the demon girl who had been accompanying Muzan that he didn't pay much attention to prior. She actually didn't attempt to aid the fallen Muzan at all. In fact, she looked to his battered state with hope and wonder in her eyes. Yoriichi decided that he'd deal with her after finishing Muzan. But when he stepped towards the man-shaped plague, Muzan's teeth began grinding violently. And in the next moment, Muzan's body broke apart with tons of force. And Yoriichi was quickly able to sense a total of 1,800 pieces of flesh, but was unfortunately only able to destroy 1,500. The remaining pieces were small, but enough to join together into a clump roughly the size of a human head. And with that, Muzan had